Hello, you're watching AWANI Review with me, Farhana Sheikh. Now, generative artificial intelligence is expected to unlock more than 500 billion ringgit in productive capacity, propelling Malaysia's position as a high-income nation. Now, as companies have already begun transforming their businesses with this powerful tool, there are also considerable risks we need to address, from biases to deepfakes. Now, here to talk more about this is Paul Burton, General Manager of IBM Asia Pacific. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Before we begin, looking into some of the considerable risks that I mentioned just now, let's talk about, the presence of AI here in Asia Pacific and APAC. How prevalent is the use of Gen AI in APAC region when compared to, other regions? How has it evolved over the years?
Generative AI is evolving quickly. Probably 40% of businesses, of CEOs, will say that they're currently using generative AI, and another 40% will say they're about to be using it or they're actively planning to use it. So I think the battle for mind share has been won by AI, and it's going to be fairly ubiquitous in APAC businesses in the short term.
Right. So what are some of the unique opportunities and challenges when it comes to implementing AI solutions, in APAC's diverse market?
Well, I think the challenges are finding use cases for the technology itself. I think when you're employing generative AI, it has some unique qualities to it, and I think you have to sort of reimagine the way that you're currently doing business, and you need to reimagine the way that you're going to apply technology. It has the ability to provide discontinuous leaps in productivity, and that has pretty meaningful impact on businesses and on workforces. For example, I think you mentioned just a moment ago that perhaps 20% of the productive capacity in Malaysia specifically could be increased, could go to 120% just by adding generative AI ubiquitously within the economy. So by freeing up all that productivity and all that labor, these are jobs that wouldn't be done otherwise that can now be done because of the increases in productivity that this technology brings to bear.
Right. Is there any challenges when it comes to implementation here, especially in the region where probably AI, is it at a mature stage when it comes to implementation here?
I wouldn't say it's at a mature stage. I'd say it's fairly incipient at this time, and that companies are really beginning to grapple with what it means to implement it. And of course, data is the lifeblood of the current enterprise, and so you have to harness a tremendous amount of data in order to feed the AI and to feed the models that are going to deploy or develop the inferences. Right. So there's tremendous need for data management, data governance, and processes and quality around that entire enterprise.
Right. Another aspect of all this is what I mentioned just now, risk when it comes to implementing as a result of the latest generative AI, for example. We talked about development of false election information, biases, deepfake. Are these concerns by people? Are these really prevalent among the AI community?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can use the technology for good and you can use the technology for bad.
Right.
And there are actors out there who want to do interesting things with the technology that may not be in the mainstream. And so I think probably as much as 25% of businesses have really deep concerns over how AI is going to be used, and so they want to put governance practices in place to make sure that it's used properly. So the phrase I like to use is AI done badly is always bad. Right. And so the trick is, how do you do it well? And so it's not just a matter of technology, it's a matter of training, it's a matter of process, it's a matter of proper use cases, it's a matter of regulating not the technology per se, but the poor application of the technology.
Right. In your years, in your years as in this industry, do you have any example cases where AI is being improperly used? I mentioned some just now, like deepfakes, for example. Are there any prominent use of it when it's not being used?
Well, we've seen examples where AI has been used to create news that was less than accurate, where we've seen it used to infringe on intellectual property rights. We've seen it used to create deepfakes, as you've mentioned. So again, AI can be used for bad purposes, but I think that's a small percentage of the overall uses of AI. I think AI overall is a good thing, and it will be a force for good, and I think it will allow a discontinuous change in productivity to take place when it's properly applied, and it's applied with standards and with proper governance.
Right. So talking about standards and proper governance here is the term responsible AI, I think. So I'll let you explain it because you're the expert here. So what does responsible AI mean to you, and why is it important in today's technological landscape?
I think responsible AI, the idea there is when you're building artificial intelligence models, every step along the way needs to be carefully considered in terms of trust. And the reason I say that is the underlying license, or the license that AI comes with, is trust. When you deploy artificial intelligence models and you make inferences based on models, people want to have confidence that those models were built correctly. They were built with data that was curated without hate, without abuse, without bias, without what I'll call bad things in it. And so that doesn't happen by chance. It happens only consciously or intentionally. And so when you're starting at the very beginning of building your models, you need to curate data, you need to strip out the bad things in the data, and you need to be, have process checks and quality checks in place so that everything that goes into the model is appropriate for the intended use of the model. And not only that, but if you're open about it and you're transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing it, then that gives people that would use the technology confidence. At IBM, for example, we produce what we call our Granite series of models, and we've published white papers that are out there on the internet for anyone to pick up and read, and it's pretty clear on what we do and how we do it, and we hope that that engenders confidence and trust in the folks that would want to use the Granite models.
Right, we want to talk about some of these considerations and indicators later, but I want to know, with regards to responsible AI, where are we in terms of having responsible AI systems here in Malaysia or even in the APAC region? Are we familiar with the concept? Is it sort of widely adopted and widely being considered when developing AI tools?
I would say it's widely being considered. I would say the adoption rate tracks with the deployment of the technology itself.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, 40% of CEOs are actively deploying AI one way or another in their enterprise. And as the concerns come to light that we're seeing in the media, perhaps on a daily basis, those concerns are informing the CEOs, who are revising their deployment strategies and revising their governance strategies so that they do deploy responsible AI. So I think businesses have the right idea in terms of doing this correctly. And their strategies evolve over time as they learn more and more.
Right. We want to talk a bit more about, challenges when it comes to implementing responsible AI and some common considerations after this break. Hi, welcome back to AWANI Review. I am Fanashe, and today I'm joined by Paul Burton, General Manager of IBM APAC, to talk about responsible AI. Now, before the break, we talked about, some of the landscape of responsible AI here in Malaysia, even challenges to implement AI, but we want to go more into depth into what responsible AI means and how do we set it up properly, right? So first and foremost, what are some of the common considerations that organizations should take into account when it comes to developing AI tools?
Well, I think looking at the raw ingredients that go into the AI itself, again, data is everything. All of the inferences, all of the insights that AI produces are based on the data that is used to build the model. So it's incredibly important at the beginning of the process to curate a set of data that doesn't infringe on copyrights, doesn't infringe on IP, doesn't have hateful or abusive or other bad content in it. And if you can curate a good data set and use that as the basis of building your model, you're off to a pretty good start. But it doesn't stop there. That's just how you start building the model. You have to have processes in place to look at the model, look at how it evolves, look at how it's trained and tuned over time, test the output of the model to make sure it's giving you responses that you think are reasonable, and then over time tune and train the model so it produces better and better responses. But also keep track of where the model is being deployed and whether it continues to produce good responses based on its data or whether it drifts or sort of goes sideways from time to time. So again, it's not something that you deploy and forget about, it's something that you care and feed over time.
Right, it's quite a mammoth task when you actually lay it down like that, how we have to go sort of step by step to make sure that we're able to correct some of the biases and correct some of the, improper ideas in it. Right, so drawing onto that, what are some of the challenges when it comes to developing, responsible AI tools? What, in your experience, when you're dealing with developers who are trying to look at building responsible AI tools, what are their roadblocks or their barriers when it comes to doing so?
I think a lot of it is skills, having the right skill set, to put together the tools and, have a vision for what the entire process looks like from start to finish. Sometimes if you don't have a clear endpoint in mind, the process that you take to get to the eventual endpoint may not be the best. Right. So I think starting and working intentionally from start to finish with specific endpoints in mind and checking your progress along the way to make sure that you're consistent with what you are intending to do and make sure that the results are consistent with what you're intending to produce, I think goes a long way. Right,
okay. There's also another segment of responsible AI, which is AI governance, right? It's a subsidiary, or is it you need to have responsible AI, then you have AI governance?
It's AI governance.
It's interconnect.
They're both hand in hand, and they both start and finish together. AI governance really needs to be part of the entire process from start or inception all the way to the end. And the idea is governance is all about understanding what's happening and making sure what's happening is consistent with your perception of what trust is and what it should be and what level of trust and integrity you owe the users ultimately of this model. And so governance has to be baked in from the first step. It has to be baked in every step along the way. And at the end of the day, whoever's using this model has to trust that the process you used, the tools that you used, the transparency of what you did is consistent with their values. Otherwise, they're not going to believe in the output or they're not going to want to use it.
Right. I mean, here in Malaysia, there was an announcement that we are developing an AI code of ethics and governance. Drawing onto that, how do you foresee challenges in implementing sort of the kind of framework that we want for AI, this AI governance framework here in Malaysia or even in the APAC region?
I think typically frameworks work best when people buy into the framework. So there's probably going to need to be a good education process, understanding what the purpose of the framework is, what results the framework is intended to produce, and then making sure that people are familiar with it and that they use it. You can provide great tools, but if they're not used in a great manner, you don't always get great results. So I think a lot of it is education, it's awareness, it's skills, it's training, and it's constant reinforcement.
Right. Another aspect of AI, responsible AI, or even AI governance is that companies develop these tools usually for a specific purpose, right? Increased productivity, increased profit, even increase efficiency. So how can companies balance the need for innovation and competitiveness when it comes to all these ethical considerations and responsible AI practices?
Well, I think the question is really, what do you regulate? Do you regulate the process of innovation? Do you regulate the technology itself? Or do you regulate the application of the technology? Right. And I think we at IBM favor the regulation of particular applications of the technology. And the reason I think that's important is you never want to stifle innovation at its inception or at its start. You want innovation to take place because all sorts of collateral innovations flow from the base innovation itself. And so if you stop that process at its root, you lose many, many things that you may not even be aware of. So the best case is to understand how the technology may manifest itself in actual use. And if it's not something that's consistent with the values of the society, then regulate that.
Right. Right. I mean, it's definitely something that you need to be able to sort of determine even before you develop the tools, right? Sort of where you want, your AI tools to go for, what's the intention, what's the value around it. Right. We talked about framework just now. I want to ask, what role do regulatory framework and industry standards actually play in promoting responsible AI practices? And how do we actually ensure compliances when it comes to all this?
Well, I think they play a large role. I think, most organizations, most developers, most technologists, they want to be consistent or adhere to whatever government regulations exist out there. So if the regulations are out there, they're accessible, they're understandable, they make sense, I think you'll get a high degree of compliance. But again, it goes back to the education process and the awareness of the regulation itself. So I think they play a large role, but also the idea of in the process of developing the regulations, bringing different stakeholders into the process to develop the regulation itself so you can get the best regulation that makes sense with the idea of innovation at heart, and then letting that innovation blossom into all sorts of different use cases. And when you find a use case that's not desirable, regulate that. Never stop the innovation itself. So have lots of stakeholders, have diverse perspectives, have a diversity of thinking, and be transparent so everyone understands what's going on.
Right, actually that comes to my next question. Who should be involved in all this, setting up a responsible AI? You mentioned all stakeholders. Is there any specific that we can point to?
Sure, you should point to businesses who are going to deploy the AI. You should point to government that has the interests of society at heart. Yeah. You should point to developers who would be developing the technology. I think those, you should point to academics who will be helping to develop the technology and thinking about it deeply in terms of ethics and integrity in other areas. So I think there's different stakeholders that should definitely be in the process. But again, the process should be open, it should be transparent, it should be fair. The public should be aware of the debate as it goes on, and the public, of course, can voice their opinion about the debate, and that may inform the debate itself. So transparency and communication, open communication, I think are very good things.
Right. I mean, that's definitely something that we would like to have, for people to be able to give their feedback, and for them to comment, for them to put in their input as well when it comes to, building something that we all are going to use, right? So, talking about, developers, stakeholders and all that, IBM, one of the leading technology providers, especially on this front. So how does IBM ensures their AI technologies are responsible, transparent, as well as, explainable to all?
And the answer is we try to be transparent in everything we do. So I mentioned this series of granite models that we built. We released a white paper that said exactly what we did and how we did it. And so anyone that cares to pick up that paper and read it, they'll know what we did and they can comment on it. Yeah. And when they comment on it, we take note of their comments. And if there's a consensus in a particular area that we did something right, that's great. If there's a consensus that we did something wrong or could do it better, that pretty much informs our judgment on how we want to revise the models going forward. So again, this idea of open communities and open source, if you like that term, are very, very important because you got literally millions of people looking at how something's developed, and consensus of opinion does develop, and no one person is smart enough to take all this together and come out with the right answer. It requires a little bit of trial, a little bit of error, and a lot of feedback. And so open communities, open comments, transparency, that's what we bake into the development of our models. That's what informs our development of our tools, and we embrace the process.
Right. I mean, you guys have been in the game for a long, long time. To startups or, smaller companies, Malaysian companies even, how difficult was the journey to get to where you are? To get to, having AI technologies that are responsible, transparent, to having a system that can instill trust in AI systems. How difficult was the journey, especially for you who have been in the industry for quite some time?
Well, I mean, it's a constant process of learning, right? And so technology is moving very fast. Right. And as the faster technology moves, seemingly the faster society moves. And so you have to keep up. And so this is a process of continuous learning. And so whatever I knew that was valuable to me in my job or my career or my life 10 years ago, probably 70%.
Be as relevant to it now, yeah.
Well, I think our CEO actually said that the half-life of knowledge these days is about 4 years. And so that means 50% of the knowledge you have today won't be useful in 4 years.
Probably obsolete already.
Yeah. Or sooner.
Sooner.
So constant learning, constant curiousness, being inquisitive about everything to stay relevant. And that's what we try to do at IBM.
Right. Talking a little bit about sort of emerging risks, new risks. How do you see responsible AI evolve in the future? Potential development in this area, especially in addressing sort of risks that, that we will foresee in the future, be it climate change or anything like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about AI and some of the technologies that are really prominent today is the problems that society is confronting, whether it be climate change, if you mentioned that, really increased urbanization all over the world, and other demographic inversions, things that we can point to. Technology is a necessary ingredient to the solution to any of those problems. And so the more that we can do in terms of AI and other relevant technologies to help us deal with climate change, with urbanization, with shrinking workforces, I think the better off society is. But then it always comes back to, are we doing it properly? Are we doing it with the right values in mind? Are we doing it in a transparent way so that people have confidence in what we're doing? And that's not a we as in IBM, that's a we as in society.
Yeah.
Are we as a society employing the technology in a way that would achieve broad consensus? And so those are the challenges going forward. I think different regions of the world, different countries are dealing with it differently because they have different cultures, and it's not that there's a right or a wrong answer, it's that there are different answers, but they all have one thing in common, and that's to advance the quality of life and to advance living standards more generally. And I think that's being achieved when you look across any region in terms of reduction in poverty, increase in the human index, etc. So there are lots of metrics out there that are getting a lot better, and it's all because of technology. So we should feel good about technology, we should feel good about innovation, we should feel good about the creative ways that we're applying it to the human condition, and I think that will only continue and accelerate.
Right. But it's important to have responsible AI in terms of trust that you said just now. I'm just thinking about, for example, with election fraud or deepfakes, for example, it really erodes people's trust in using applications, in AI applications. So how do we actually solve that? This is more sort of eroding trust within the public and instilling, sort of countering those sort of negative narrative when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think you're seeing countries very recently, perhaps the U.S. and the EU, for example, or the U.S. and Britain, for example, agreeing to work together to develop technology to test the technology, if you want to look at it that way. Yeah. And so AI is, produces inferences, it produces deep fakes, it produces bad information, fake news, if you like that term. And so the question is, how do it just is intuitive and makes sense that we ought to be able to develop technology that can develop inferences about the propriety of that outcome. And I think that's what you're going to see going forward, and I suspect it will become more in vogue very soon.
Yeah, because I would imagine, the narrative of, AI doing all these horrible things, we have to counter with more responsible AI, but at the same time, it doesn't really move in tangent with each other.
Well, it's a bit of an arms race now, isn't it? Every time we produce a piece of great technology, someone else is producing a piece of technology that frustrates the great technology. And so, it's a race, but at the same time, it's going to go on. And I think that governments will find an appropriate way to regulate. And I think that technologists, for the most part, will want to be regulated because they want people to have confidence in the technology that they're producing. But at the end of the day, if you, as an individual, are deploying technology in a malicious way or a malignant way, you should be held responsible for that.
Right.
So the idea of holding the person responsible that performs the bad act, I think, is something that most of us could agree on. And I think most of the time, we can track down through technical means who is deploying the bad technology, and we can bring it to an end. But it requires effort, it requires regulation, it requires new ways of policing, if you will, and I suspect that we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, this is cybersecurity bill in the making. Right, okay. Last question before we wrap up is, empowering the society as a whole to embrace and benefit from responsible AI. How do we go about that?
Education and awareness, training, trial and error, but trial and error in a healthy way. So deploy use cases, get the results of the use cases. If you're happy, evolve the technology. If you're not happy, tune it and adjust and get to a better result. So this is not a technology where you just go all in blindly. It's a technology that requires iteration and incremental improvements, and they can be fast iteration, fast incremental improvements, but each step of the way you need to stop and test, stop and test, stop and test, so that you can be happy with the results. Because if you get into an accelerated spiral where the technology just starts getting deployed in an out of control way, it's hard to bring it back.
Right.
And so test, 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 test.
Right. Also be mindful of the testing process as well. Like you said, do not let it go overboard. Before we wrap up, what's the pipeline for IBM on this front?
It's a big pipeline.
Okay, that's good to know.
It's a big pipeline. There's plenty of opportunity there, and but again, our focus is on helping clients deploy AI to be more competitive and more productive, to help people do their jobs in new and interesting ways, to create new jobs for people. Because algorithms are doing their old jobs. So this is not an issue of jobs being replaced, this is an issue of jobs being created as well as existing jobs being augmented. And it's an exciting time to be in technology.
Definitely, definitely. And all with ethical considerations. So there you have it, responsible AI.
There you go.
Right, so that's Paul Burton, General Manager of IBM APAC, joining us to talk about the importance of AI, but more importantly, the importance of doing it, using the tool responsibly. I'm Fanashe. Thank you for watching.